Module 8, Teaching Globally Relevant Topics in Your Courses. Since you've elected to complete this module, we probably don't need to convince you of the importance of integrating global topics in your courses. What you may need help with is how to do so. This module focuses on how you can teach globally relevant topics in your courses. In this module, you will see a few models for global education. Learn about the elements of culture, explore a variety of teaching strategies to integrate global perspectives, and complete 6 activities to reinforce the concepts in this module. By the end of this module, you should be able to describe the elements of culture as presented by Delaney, discuss strategies used to integrate global perspectives in your classes. As teachers, we face a challenge. That challenge is to prepare our students for their future careers. However, that task can be quite challenging. We know most careers require people to have a broader worldview and an understanding of things on a global scale. The big challenge is that many of our students have very limited experiences and a narrow view of the world. Dare we say, they are often a little ignorant. We propose integrating global topics in your courses as a great first step in helping our students be better prepared. It might be helpful to have a model for global education to help you frame your own educational activities. In this model, we begin with an experiential learning approach, where learners have an experience, reflect on that experience, make meaning from what they experienced, and then repeat the cycle. Aside from creating a quality learning activity, reflection is probably the most critical piece. Be sure to build in opportunities for students to reflect. The next part of the model is the triangle in the center, which reflects the 3 complementary goals for global education: technical competence, intercultural competence, and critical thinking. Outcomes in these 3 areas can be observed as changes in knowledge, attitudes, skills, or aspirations. One of our first goals as educators is to know what we expect our learners to gain from the experience. Once we know this, it will guide what we teach and how we teach it. Another way to think about your outcomes for global education is using a Venn diagram like this one. Your goal should be hitting the intersection of all 3 focal areas. You are already the expert at the technical content, so that part should be easy. The next piece is getting your students to think critically about the topic. Earlier modules have addressed this already. The final piece is cultural awareness. How does the local culture impact the way people think critically and apply the technical content? It is the cultural awareness piece that really brings the global context to an issue. However, for many of you, this may be the most challenging piece to integrate. We will spend the remainder of this module exploring how you might make this happen. Culture is a very complex issue to examine. Anthropologists and sociologists have many different ways of defining culture. Culture can occur in many different social structures, including nationalities, religions, geographic regions, work disciplines, etc. All of us engage in many cultural groups at any given time. You might be an American, a Midwesterner, a Catholic, a university faculty member, a conservationist, and a female all at the same time. In a simplistic manner, a culture is a shared meaning of normal behaviors in a given social structure. Making sweeping generalizations about a culture can be challenging and complex, which makes some people uncomfortable. Our recommendation is to talk about one person and how their culture impacts their situations and the decisions they make. In the following slides, we will present one way of looking at culture, which consists of 8 dimensions as proposed by Delaney. Some of the dimensions may be more connected to your content than others. Space, and the way space is used, can be a very observable part of a culture. Personal space varies greatly from culture to culture. A person's identity based on a nation, region, or community can also vary. People may identify as an American or maybe as a Texan. You can also observe physical divisions like fences, walls, gates, and even natural divisions like rivers and mountains. The value and use of public spaces like parks, restaurants, markets, museums, and public restrooms all vary from culture to culture. Land tenure and usage also vary. Some cultures value private ownership, where others have communal lands. The types of housing and arrangements of houses varies. Homes may be in very close proximity, with many generations living together, or small bungalows scattered far apart. Think about your content and how the use of space in another culture may impact that content. An example may be agricultural production and fencing. Is fencing prevalent? If so, who is responsible for installing and maintaining the fencing? Are livestock grazed in fenced pastures or do they free roam? When teaching your classes, think about how the way another culture uses space might impact the topics you teach. Another cultural dimension is time. Different cultures approach time in different ways. An obvious difference may be the actual calendar used by a culture. The Western calendar used in the U.S. may not be the same one used by local indigenous peoples. Agrarian and fishing communities may base time more on seasons and tides than dates on a calendar. Another manifestation of time is timeliness. Some cultures value keeping exact appointments, whereas others use an appointment as a general indicator of when they might meet you. You've probably heard of sayings like island time and Latin time to indicate that timeliness is less critical. Another aspect of time is the value of past, present, and future. Some cultures place very high value on the past and their ancestors. Others place highest value on the present. Let's live today to the fullest, for example. Other cultures place the highest value on the future. Understanding where a culture places most value will help you understand the people. For an agricultural production example, maybe the timing of an application of a pesticide or fertilizer is critical. But if the farmer is in a culture that does not strictly adhere to timeliness, there may need to be a different approach used. In your teaching, consider how the way a culture uses time may interact with the content you teach. An obvious and observable cultural dimension is language. The language or languages a group of people use can explain quite a bit about their culture and the connections between similar cultures. Languages are complicated and consist of many dialects. For example, in the U.S., English is the predominant language. But English in New England is a little different than English in the South, which is different than English in the Southwest. Further complicating language is when people start to intermix two or more languages, like English and Spanish in parts of the U.S., or more formal language mixes like Creole. Language is a socially agreed upon way to represent ideas and objects. Words can take on different meanings in different cultures. An interesting example in the U.S. is in Texas. Texans use the word tank to mean a pond constructed to water livestock. In other parts of the country, the term pond might be used. An agricultural production example for language might be the common name used for a given crop. A simple way to integrate language in your teaching is to explain how another culture would talk about the concept. Another dimension of culture is relatives and relations. Cultures approach relationships in very different ways. Some cultures value the large extended family, where others place most value on the immediate small family. In some cultures, it is very common for multiple generations to live in the same house. The definition of marriage also varies by culture. For example, some cultures use arranged marriages. In some cultures, it is common for people to marry as young teenagers, and in some cultures, polygamy is accepted. The acceptance of divorce also varies, as does remarriage after divorce or widowing. Culture can also impact decision-making within a family. The acceptance of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people is impacted by local culture. At the core, culture impacts and defines acceptable ways for people to interact and the way relationships are approached. An agricultural production example of relatives and relations may be the way a culture operationalizes the decision-making process. Perhaps the family elder or village elder has the ultimate say in agricultural production decisions, even if the individual farmer is a capable adult. To bring relatives and relationships into your teaching, think about how family structure or relationships might impact the concepts you teach. The way people look at themselves and others can be impacted by culture. Things like ideal body image can vary. For example, tall or short, thin or plump. Cultural status based on skin tone can also vary. In some cultures, people with lighter, pigmented skin are seen as higher status, where in other cultures it does not matter. The prevalence of tattoos and piercings is also influenced by culture. Culture also impacts the way people position their bodies, like posture and arm crossing. In the U.S., if someone is sitting straight up, leaning forward, and looking you in the eyes, it generally means they are attentive to what you are saying. Other cultures may not express attentiveness in the same manner. Cultures also differ in the way they approach death and the handling of a dead body. Cremation may be common or may be embalming. The period of time for a wake can also vary. For an agribusiness example, a person making a sales call to a farmer of another culture needs to understand the body language from that culture. Look at the concepts you teach and think about how a culture approaches the human body. Food is a cultural dimension with obvious connections to agriculture. The types of food eaten or not eaten are often impacted by culture. For example, Hindu people do not eat beef, and Muslim people do not eat pork. Other examples could be preferences for rice or potatoes, processed foods or fresh foods, insects or no insects. Culture can also influence the number of meals eaten each day, when those meals are eaten, and which meal is the largest. Food is often linked to meaningful cultural events. Certain foods may be linked with celebratory feasts, much like turkey with Thanksgiving in the U.S. Cooking and food preparation also have cultural connections. Who purchases the food, who cooks the food, and who serves the food can all vary. For example, in the U.S., women often do most of the cooking inside the house, where men often do most of the cooking outside on a grill. For an agricultural marketing example, maybe in a given culture it is common for the men, but not for the women, to read the weekly newspaper. But the women are responsible for making food purchases. Advertising a food item in the weekly newspaper may not have the desired effect. Take a look at the concepts you teach. Is there a way you can integrate cultural food practices? Clothing is another very observable dimension of culture. As a core function, clothing serves to protect the human body. However, many cultures have very distinct clothing. Clothing can help demonstrate the modesty of a given culture. Some cultures value a large portion of the body covered, like Muslim women. Other cultures accept a large portion of the body visible. Types of clothing can vary, including styles, textures, fabrics, colors, and lines. Many cultures have traditional clothing for special occasions and more traditional clothing for everyday wearing. For an agricultural example, maybe in a hot and dry area, the culture has adopted male farmers wearing long linen gowns, like an Arab thob, to protect their skin and keep them cool. To integrate clothing in your teaching, consider using pictures showing people in other parts of the world dressed as they typically dress. Important people, places, and things can be very significant in a culture. Individual people, like Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, can become larger than life, or historical people like Jesus or Muhammad can have significant importance. Ancestral people, like the Mayas, Aztecs, and Incas, can still have major cultural importance. Places can also help define a culture, with places like the Eiffel Tower, the pyramids in Egypt, the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, or the Taj Mahal in India. Important things might be tea time in England, baseball in the US, soccer in many places around the world, and carnival in Brazil. These things can have significant meaning in a culture. For an agricultural example, in an area where soccer is very important, a big soccer match might stop all farming activity while the game is on TV, regardless of the activities needed to be done on the farm. In your teaching, think about how important people, places, and things might interact with the concepts you teach. For your first activity, take a reflective look at your own culture. Based on the elements of culture presented in this module, make some notes on how you would describe your own culture. Now that you have a little better understanding of culture, let's explore a few specific ways you might integrate global activities in your classes. Pictures and video are an easy way to integrate a global perspective in your teaching. Careful attention should be placed on selecting the correct picture or video. First, it should connect directly to the concept being taught. Don't just insert random pictures from a recent trip abroad. Careful attention should be placed, making sure one or more of the elements of culture are obvious in the picture or video. Video has the obvious advantage of allowing your students to see and hear the person. Pictures and video should be of high quality. Refer back to the module on digital media. Thinking back to our earlier discussion on culture, the biggest thing to consider is what you see in the picture or video. You should strive to show the cultural context that surrounds the subject of the picture, like the people or the landscape. Video can be very powerful to actually hear people and see them in action. Consider the two pictures in this slide. The one on the left shows just the fish. It could have been taken anywhere, including in the US. In contrast, the picture on the right shows the same fish, but also shows the farmer who raised them and an idea of the landscape around his farm. A video would further enhance this topic by being able to hear the farmer discuss issues in his own words. Take a look at the video linked in Canvas, Belizean Farming System Resiliency to Climate Change. What elements of culture do you see addressed in this video? Developing a case study or scenario was covered in an earlier module. They can be a great way to virtually take your students to a different culture and experience another culture, especially if you use a variety of pictures and video. Developing a case study or scenario gives you the opportunity to build a story using real-world situations. The benefit of a well-developed case study or scenario is that it is contextually rich. One strategy you may consider is to tell the story from one person's perspective, taking great effort to bring that person to life. Take a look at the case study linked in Canvas, Perceptions and Roles of Women Serving as Gatekeepers of Household Food Security. What elements of culture do you see addressed? Using a guest speaker is another great way to integrate global perspectives in your courses. Most universities have quite a few faculty from other countries that can talk about the subjects you teach and their own culture. Another great resource are American-born faculty who have worked in other countries. They also have good insight to share with your students. Students from other countries are also great guest speakers, but they may not have the same level of expertise or experience as faculty. Another option is using current digital technologies like Skype to virtually bring in guest speakers from around the world. Video connections provide a better option than audio connections because they allow your speaker to be seen. Regardless of which of these strategies you implement, the key to a successful guest speaker is having clearly defined learning outcomes for the experience, communicating those with your guest speaker, and then debriefing the experience afterward. For our next activity, think about your classes. If you could bring a guest speaker into your classroom, who would it be? Where would they be from? And what would you want your students to learn? Your own personal experiences give you an easy way to integrate global perspectives in your classes. Most of us travel internationally for both personal and professional reasons, especially conferences. As you travel, you should always be thinking about gathering relevant information to share with your classes. Be sure to do some research before you travel to see if there are specific things to see or people to talk with that will provide great examples to share with your classes. You may consider adding a day or two extra to your trip for this purpose. Be sure to take plenty of high-quality pictures and shoot video footage to share. An important point to remember is that a short visit to a particular place probably does not give as complete a picture or an expert view of the culture or topic. Be sure to qualify what you say with a statement like, based on what I saw on my short trip to, or according to the farmer I talked with in this country. Think back to a previous international travel experience. What could you have done differently to better gather information to share with your students? Current events can provide a great way to integrate global perspectives. They also give you an opportunity to have your students think critically about a topic. Once you've selected a topic or issue, the first thing to do is find reputable sources of information that give a variety of viewpoints. As you select what to share with your students, consider the types of materials to use. Text provides a very abstract representation of a concept. As we've discussed earlier in this module, pictures provide a decent way to show culture, but videos are even better. A guest speaker would also be a good option. USAID has a large library of videos on food and agriculture topics. Take a look at the USAID website and their video library linked in Canvas. Can you find a video with relevance to your class? Another great way to integrate global perspectives is to have your students do research on another country. You could even have them do a comparison on that issue in the U.S. and the other country. You may have all your students work on the same country, or you could have each student look at a different country. When setting up the research projects, be sure to have students look at many different dimensions of the issue, including social and cultural issues. You may even require students to interview someone from the other country, or at least someone with first-hand knowledge of the country.